What is going on, guys? Scar coming at you with another Magic the Gathering video. In today's video, we'll be diving into some jank decks, kind of going over what we find on the internet when we look for some stuff that's kind of off the typical standard meta that is currently in the rank queues and even the play queue for the most part, and that is the jank decks. Now, these decks I wouldn't say are super duper jank in the sense that there's some weird combo that we're really trying to pull off, but they're jank in the sense that they are unique in what they're trying to do. They have a very unique win strategy, and compared to what the standard meta is, where it seems very cut and dry of what people are trying to do, these decks are definitely off brand from that. With that being said, guys, if you like the video, hit that like button. It definitely helps the channel a lot. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button. You'll be notified when I post new videos on the channel, and let's dive into the decks. Now, the first and foremost thing, before I dive into the decks directly, if you haven't known or haven't really checked out, but on magic.gg, you can actually find the various deck lists based on whatever format you're looking for. They do historic and they also do standard. And I am right now looking at the January 4th standard decks that they get posted when a deck wins 6 or more games in a row during ranked play. So these decks are platinum / mythic, so these are decks that you may see on the rank ladder. Now, sure, these are for traditional, but I mean, with all in all, you can kind of make a few tweaks with the sideboards, making it a little bit better with the current meta that you kind of see that you're playing in the overall rank and ladder for best of one. So these decks kind of can probably be tied into either or to try to make them work, to make them at least somewhat best of one viable, or you can always play them on the traditional standard ladder. So with that being said, let's actually dive into our first deck. Now, this first deck that we actually have up, this one's actually fairly interesting in what it's trying to do. It doesn't look like it's trying to do very much. It has actually a whole pile of very, very expensive cards, as you can kind of see here, but I'm calling this one the Sultai Ramp because Decklists on the website don't really actually give you a name, so I'm just kind of going off of the color scheme and kind of looking like what they're trying to do overall at first glance. From what it looks like, we are playing various things that kind of help us generate additional mana to kind of ramp up into kind of that end game mentality, to try to get to this very large pile, as you can kind of see forming right next up to the lands of all the things that cost like 6 or 7 mana and more. And this is actually fairly interesting on what it's trying to do, kind of with how the meta is kind of forming. And we're playing lands, we're playing Lotus Cobra for the landfall, we have some cultivates for the ramp, migration path to throw them things on the battlefield. There's a Pelucranos in the 4-drop slot, a Titan's Nest, which is actually, I feel like, one of those cards that you may not think about, but the idea here is that we can actually sacrifice or exile a target card from our graveyard and actually gain colorless mana, which helps us kind of get that below on that like overall graveyard size, especially if we're playing against like rogues. Nissa, which is another interesting one, which I feel like she doesn't get too much love in the the scene when it comes to standard. But overall, I mean, the idea here is we're really just trying to get some of these big creatures on the battlefield, just kind of overwhelm our opponents with power, and just kind of take advantage of that. I mean, it's kind of like an interesting array of cards here that we're definitely trying to hit. But I mean, if we hit any of them, certain ones are a little bit more powerful than others. We'd definitely overwhelm our opponent with too much power on the battlefield, especially if they don't have too much removal. We will definitely overpower them in that sense. And we have some cards that we can kind of replay back from the graveyard onto the battlefield, which definitely helps us out in that retrospect as well. I mean, the other thing too is you kind of see here, we also play Emergent Ultimatum, which is another interesting card here, which allows us to search our library for up to 3 cards that are monocolored, of course, and we can actually make our opponent make the choice of what 2 are going to go in the battlefield and which one goes into which one goes in our graveyard, which is another interesting thing. So our opponent's going to actually have to be like, well, crap, what am I going to have to deal with here? And depending on the deck matchup, this has definitely helped us take over and kind of overwhelm our opponent, like I said, with just way too many things. But overall, I mean, this deck is fairly interesting. It kind of makes you wonder, like, exactly what how the games went, what they played against to actually get the 6 wins in a row. But I mean, there are definitely things that we can definitely overwhelm our opponent with. I mean, I like the idea of playing actually the Barocos, which is a mutate card, and the idea of being able to play him from our graveyard allows us to kind of surprise our opponent with a mutate from the graveyard for 5 mana, which is definitely good. If we can get the Kinnan up to 7 mana, which actually allows us to ramp up even more, because it allows us to, whenever we tap non-land permanent 4 mana, add 1 mana of any type, that mana that it produced. So if we tap the Great Henge, we now get to add 1 more mana of that mana that it produced, so additional green. And then if we get to the 7, we can look at top 5 cards of our library, you can put a non-creature card among them onto the battlefield and put the rest on our bottom of our library in any order, which essentially helping us to try to hit this big pile here. And then like the mixture of lands here, you got the islands, the swamps, the forests, temples, and the triomes. I mean, you probably also throw in some pathways here. I don't know. I kind of can't. I think maybe Kaldheim's actually when they introduced these soul type favored pathways, but maybe there is one that's blue green or blue black. I think there's definitely a blue black one, but this is definitely each of their own pathways definitely come into play untapped, so that's a possibility. But that may be the idea to scry something to the bottom of the graveyard, top of graveyard or top of library. I mean, is definitely probably a way to go. But with that being said, I mean, this deck is fairly interesting. I'm definitely going to play a few games, kind of see how it plays in best of one. Like I said, the sideboard you can probably play around with if you want to add any of this to the main deck, depending on how you feel like, your matchups are going against the current standard meta in the best of one. Maybe throw in some Bloodchief's Thirst if you feel like you're going to overwhelm by early game, because that's where I do feel like it's lacking, is the early game aggro aggressive deck. So maybe you can add in some, removal is always good. But overall, like I said, it's definitely interesting of a deck to kind of play around with and see how well you can do with it. So the next deck up is actually a deck that I'm a big fan of, just because I do find the idea of kind of, getting X amount of things on the battlefield, and that is a 5-color shrine deck. Overall, if you haven't played shrines or haven't played against shrines, essentially what we're trying to do here is just get each shrine onto the battlefield, and essentially for each shrine we have on the battlefield are things either get cheaper, we get to do certain abilities, like the blue shrine, for example, we get to draw X cards, and where X is number of shrines we control, and then we discard a card to help us dig a little bit deeper for some more shrines. We got this card where we get to discard a land card, it deals X damage for 1 mana. You got the green shrine that helps us ramp with some rampage. We got the white shrine that helps us tap down our opponent's things, and it plays an interesting amount of removal. There's Bloodchief's Thirst, there's extinction events, so we're like leaning on more of the black removal. I forgot about the Sanctum of the Stone Fangs, which helps us gain some life and makes our opponent lose X life. Genesis Ultimatum is actually a fairly interesting card here because we are playing 5 colors. Might as well throw it in there. Helps us kind of look at the top 5 cards of our library, put 5 permanents onto the battlefield. Definitely good there. Barrier Breach, I guess if you're facing a lot of other enchantments, especially if you're facing more of like if you're facing more Doom Foretold style decks, that's definitely something you could possibly play. But I mean, overall in the current standard that's currently going on, maybe this is something you'd probably either scrap or just look for something else for spot removal in the 3 slot. Maybe this is where you would bring in more spot removal. There's some cards in the sideboard too, maybe some more Genesis Ultimatums. Heroic Intervention is actually fairly interesting here because it gives our things X-Proof Indestructible. Negates are maybe another thing if you want to have some spot removal or spot counters. And then we just play a whole pile of lands just because we are trying to hit the 5 colors, so we can play all these various shrines and things like that, especially the Sanctum of All, because this is actually what makes the deck kind of work very, very efficiently, because this allows us to look in our graveyard and or our library for a shrine that we're looking for, put onto the battlefield. And then if ability would trigger and we control 6 or more shrines, we get to trigger additional times. So essentially by that point, if we get to the shrine, I guess, ultimate, essentially we are going to just pretty much win the game there, because our opponent, unless they can remove stuff, is going to be in for a bad time, and definitely not a great deck. Like I said, if you haven't seen shrines, I do have a video on the channel. It is a little bit dated because it's, I think, before Zendikar, so you can definitely take a look at that. But like I said, this is definitely a very interesting deck that someone's actually playing on the ladder to rank up. Like I said, you can always play around with it, kind of put a little bit of this, a little bit of that, depending on how you feel like you're matching up. It's definitely something that's a little bit tricky in the current standard meta that's kind of going on, but if you can get it to work, it's definitely gonna treat you well. With that being said, let's move on to the next deck. Now, this next deck up on the list is actually something I also dabbled in prior, and that is actually a Golgari Death Touch style deck. Now, I mean, we're not really definitely going 100% in for the Death Touch, playing all the various things in the meta or in the standard, collection that you can play with Death Touch. But what we are doing is we actually are playing a bunch of things that just take advantage or just very overall powerful that have Death Touch on them. For example, like you get the Falmir Knight. It's just a 1-mana 1/1 with Death Touch. The ability that later in the game, if we want to, we can always draw a card and lose a life. With this other side ability of playing a creature, which is definitely good. Combine that with Edgewall Innkeeper, just a cheap way to draw a card with Edgewall Innkeeper. We have Ranger's Guile, which gives our creature hexproof, which is definitely solid, especially with all the spot removal and like rogues and things like that. You got ram throughs and things like that we can use our little Falmir Knight and make it do damage to target creature. With Death Touch, it automatically dies even if we only do 1 damage because of the Death Touch. Combine that with Cheville, allowing us to draw a card. if it has a bounty counter on it, and we gain 3 life, which is definitely very solid. We can also mill or have a little bit of ramp. A 3/1's definitely good. Also, Hood of Blightfang is a very interesting card. A 1/4, definitely a very large body for a lot of the spot removal that is in the meta for the most part when it comes to burn. But the idea that here, if we swing in with our Death Touchers, we now are going to just automatically ping our opponent for 1 point of life, and we're going to gain a point of life, and then whenever we control the creature we control deals damage to a planeswalker, destroy that planeswalker as long as it has Death Touch, which is definitely interesting. We make Inscription Rune's another card. Like, these inscription cards I think kind of got got swept underneath the rug in Zendikar, but this one's actually fairly interesting for the style of deck where you're playing. You can tap 3 mana. We can make target opponent just discard 2 cards. We can make them return. We can return target creature card with mana cost 2 or less from our graveyard to the battlefield, and then we can just target creature for mana cost 3 or less. And if we kick it for additional 4 mana, so this is a 7 mana spell, we can do all of them depending on the situation. So in the late game, this is actually a fairly powerful removable spell to kind of slow down our opponent or stop them in their tracks. Pelican Perdition is another interesting card because this is something, if you're playing against something where your opponent's playing very big cards, this is definitely a very good hand spot removal thing, and it makes them discard that card, get things to get things back from the graveyard, or play it as a land tapped. Love Struck Beast is just an overall solid card. Questing Beast is in the deck. Kogla is a fight spell, allowing it to destroy target artifact if it attacks, and combine that with Great Henge makes all these things that we are playing for super cheap now come into play with a +1/+1 counter and draw a card. And of course we can tap for 2 mana and gain some life. And then the mixture of things here too. I don't think there's a pathway that's for black and green, but I think in Call Time we are going to get one. And then, like I said, depending on with all the other decks, depending on your what you feel like you want to do, you can always tweak your deck based on the meta you feel like you're playing against a lot in the ladder, or even play queue. You can always add in Dust, which is spot removal in the graveyard. Some of the rest is if you want some more non-creature spell removal, Agonize or Remorse, maybe instead of the Pelican Perdition. Will, if you think you're going to need some artifact destruction. Pit of Blightfang if you want to add an additional one, but I feel like you don't want to draw too many of these, but at the same time too, you maybe want more. Pestilent Haze is another interesting one that I think a lot of people also underestimate. 3 mana -2/2 is definitely very good here, in the sense that if a lot of people are playing very aggro aggressive decks, this actually could remove a lot of things. But at the same time too, you got to remember it's going to also do -2/2 to your end of the board. Barrier Breach, which I guess is another interesting exile removal. Extinction Event, and of course Gem Razor, which is also fairly good. But yet again, I would say mix in what you think you would need to, depending on how you feel like you're matching up against certain decks. But it's pretty cool to see a Death Touch style deck in a meta and doing fairly well. I mean, I'm not sure if the person who played this is continuously playing Death Touch, but this is definitely something I do find fun. Yet again, it's one of those things that take it for a test drive and kind of see how it plays out for yourself before you make your judgments on what you think of the deck. But let's move on to the next deck. Hey, so this is actually a post-recording follow-up to my video. So if it feels like the video actually ended in a weird spot, is that I actually recorded 2 more decks for this current video that we're going over. But in essence, when I went to actually import the video that I recorded, I ended up somehow not either recording or something happened, in the sense that my video player just decided to just stop after the first 3 decks, and then just kind of it kind of went to an empty spot where I guess I was in between switching from deck to deck, and then just ended there. So I don't know if I gotta check out my storage and see if I'm over the limit. But with that being said, guys, I mean, I hope you like this video. I will try to get you guys the other 2 videos down in the description down below. If you're looking at the screen now, it's probably switching over to my other screen that's showing you a video that you may be interested in on the channel. Or if you're new here, you want to subscribe, there's probably a subscribe button as well. If you want to leave a comment asking any questions, just drop one down in the comments below. But until next time, guys, I will see you in the next video.